Welcome to Realms Unknown, a science fiction and fantasy podcast brought to you by the Bugle. The wind howled through the mountain pass, carrying the blood scent of iron, orc sweat, and distant smoke. Heir of Blackthorn tightened the hitch on his vambrace, his sword resting in easy reach against the jagged rocks beside him. The enemy host gathering in the valley below, a dark tide of spears and banners. They would come at dawn. A sudden clatter and clank of metal to his left. Oh, shit! No sword, no touching Daddy's sword, Pumpkin. Dane, put the sword down. Heir lunged with worn-honed reflexes to retrieve the length of razor-sharp metal from his 1-year-old son's grubby hands before the boy could take the experimental lick he was clearly winding up for. Plus, behind him, beside the meager windbreak of the cart, his 2-year-old daughter Lyra poked at the embers of their dying fire with a stick. Naughty boy, Dane, she declared, as if it were a royal decree. Heir sighed, setting his sword out of easy reach on the cart, an act against all his warriors' training. Dane, seeing his toy withdrawn, unleashed a noise no mortal child should have been capable of, a sound that could curdle milk and summon demons from the depths. Heir, vambrace dangling, picked the boy up to nestle a wet, wailing face into his thick, muscular neck. Lyra tugged on his belt. "Biscuit?" she demanded. Heir sent his tower-trained memory sorting through his mental inventory of their dwindling surprise. "We have dried apples." "No, you said I could have a biscuit." "Apples or nothing, little hawk." She glared, the same steel in her eyes as her mother's. He reached with one hand into the cart, nicking his forearm on the razor edge of his sword, and handed Lyra the apples. "God ball fucking damn shit. Mummy says we shouldn't say bad words." Does she? Well, you can tell your mummy that she's welcome to Realms Unknown. Welcome to Realms Unknown. You've just entered a weekly speculative fiction podcast brought to you by the Bugle, in which we turn the gentle suckling of discussion about tropes, news, our favorite old shows, books, games, and more in sci-fi and fantasy, and bring it to our warm, maternal hearts. I'm your host, published author and comedian Alice Fraser, and my companion on this journey, the baby Jesus to my mother Mary, the baby Groot to my rocket raccoon, is Chris Skinner.
I would argue that there's as much sugar in a dried apple as there is in a biscuit. And I think the child should be aware both options were a win, as far as I'm concerned.
A reminder, if you enjoy listening to the show, to subscribe to the Bugle channel. It helps us out immensely. And all of the books that we covered here will be in our affiliate store, and the rest of the shows and games and movies that we discuss will be linked in the show notes, so you can discover them if you like the sound of them as we discuss them. Now, for our news section. Chris, any news?
Alice, I'm not quite sure what your take is on Predator. I guess there's a couple of ways you can look at it. It's that the kind of weird collaboration they did with Alien based on a set designer's whim. There's the original movies, which were all right. And now there's the fact that there is going to be, trust me, in the next 20 years, probably 40 more Predator movies. Such is the trend these days. The next one, I don't know if you've heard of it. There was a trailer that came out last week. It's Predator Badlands. And it kind of looks like all trailers in this genre. Absolutely incredible. And I expect it's going to be a 2-star movie. You know, I think these kinds of sort of apocalyptic, are they baddies? Are they goodies? Are they dreadlocks on the Predator type movies are almost always not great. But honestly, watch the trailer. It's an absolute banger.
First of all, I love a great trailer. Second of all, as Maria Bamford says, I do enjoy a 2-star experience. Sometimes it is exactly what you want. And in other news, Sinners has rocketed to the top of all sorts of charts this week, which is this horror movie. I don't know if I'm allowed to spoil the ending, so I don't want to say too much about it, but it is doing incredibly well. And if you have a chance, go and see it. Maybe we can do a deep dive in it in another couple of weeks where it won't be so spoilerific. But just as a sight unseen, go and see it with your sight. And that brings us to our ad section for today. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Elven Organic Whole Gruel. Now with new Feywild Probiotic Eternity Gut Health Blend. Doesn't your child deserve to ascend beyond the filthy snacks of other mortal spawn? 100% organic, hand-gathered by moonlit sprites in the sacred groves of the Silver Vale. No pesticides, no dryad residue, just pure whole grains. Gluten-free, guilt-free, and perfect for your precious pre-paladins, future sorcerers, and fey changeling children who only eat starlight and life force. Elven Organic Whole Gruel, now with new Feywild Probiotic Eternity Gut Health Blend. Only about 8 times more expensive than its direct competition. But what's the health of your children really worth to you? And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the orc-strength baby carrier. Do your weekly human carriers keep breaking? Try the orc-strength ergo baby horde control carrier. Optimized to keep your little terror contained and close to you for the biggest battles and longest journeys, including 3 fully functional weapons racks that can also function as change bags. Guaranteed through tantrums, toll attacks, and apocalypses. Comes with free teething axe. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Scry and Cry Mirror Baby Monitor Mirror Magic Kit. Watch your precious infant from anywhere in the castle with the Scry and Cry Mirror Baby Monitor Mirror Magic Kit. Crystal clear visions, night vision mode, and an emergency break mirror it's talking to the baby mode, just in case it turns out to have caught a curse. See how your child is sleeping or if they're awake. Use the mirror's see the future mode to imagine a future in which they might eventually sleep. Cry and Scry Mirror Baby Monitor Mirror Magic Kit. Just add half a glass of water. And that brings us to what have you been enjoying? Chris, what have you been enjoying?
2 things, Alice, I'd love to discuss with you. I was lucky enough to go to the stage production of the Studio Ghibli movie My Neighbour Totoro. I think we haven't done Studio Ghibli on this program yet, which are, there's 15, 20 movies, I think, under the Studio Ghibli brand. Some are based on traditional stories, some are new stories, some are really high fantasy or sci-fi, some actually very much not. My Neighbor Totoro is a, all of the films are kid friendly, but some a bit scarier than others. This, however, was a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I just, when fantasy is done well, it just looks incredible, doesn't it? And so the story basically, it's 2 kids, the mum's sick, the dad's taking them out to the countryside. There are tree spirits. They meet the tree spirits. The tree spirits are wonderful. It's a bit light on plot, but like the movie, it's just such a joyous experience. So if you can't go and see the stage production, just as a reminder, go and watch film. Watch any Studio Ghibli film. I haven't found one yet that I haven't just really, really loved.
My claim to fame is that I'm friends with someone who was in a really terrible stage show with someone who is the puppet master for that particular stage production of My
Wow.
Neighbor Totoro. There you go.
Well, the puppetry is great. The puppetry is so great, and the puppeteers, their role extends from the animals and the sprites right the way through to the sets. They're essentially puppeteering the sets. So if that production was rubbish, I'd be surprised if the puppetry was bad. Because that was a real highlight. It's a great claim to fame, Alice. I think you've got better ones, but that's a good one.
Well, I've got 2 things that I've been into this week because I've done my back. So I spent a lot of time flat on my back listening to or reading books. I have read A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett, which is a sequel to a book that I recommended not so long ago on
Yeah.
here by Robert Jackson Bennett. It's the one in which they live in a sort of a fantasy world where the science is about plant life. So every season, these titans come through from the sea, and the blood of the titans is sort of corrupting, and it alters the world around them in ways that are like terrible and distorting. But the technology of the empire uses that corruption to enhance people's abilities in order to help them run the empire. And the point of the empire is to defend against these titans and keep them from overwhelming civilization and turning it all into, so for example, if some of this titan blood gets in a civilization, you would have plants that grew teeth and the people would turn into plants. And it's all quite grotesque and like intense,
Wow.
the imagery. But it's also a really interesting meditation on autocracy and on power and on ambition. And it's a lot of fun and sort of run through this classic Sherlock Holmes-Watson duet where our protagonist is an investigator and his senior investigator is a lady who sort of has to wear a blindfold because she's so easily overwhelmed by the sensory input because she's just a pattern recognition machine. She's essentially coded as an autistic person who has this real capacity to solve things with her brain, but is sort of incapable of not solving everything all the time. And so they work together. He brings her the information and she sorts it, and he's kind of out in the world and she's back at home putting all the pieces together. And it's really, really fun. And then on the other side of the ledger,
Sorry, I'd love to ask a question about that, Alice.
yes,
So would you say that is like the way that bends into another genre? That sounds to me like a sort of PI style story, like there is like a sleuthing. Is that the sort of the next the subgenre beyond the fantasy that takes on?
yes, they're essentially solving a murder mystery in both the
Yeah,
first
love
book
that.
and the second book. And yeah, their relationship develops. They find out more about one another. It's all just so much fun.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then on the other end of the ledger, I've been reading The Last Hour Between Worlds by Melissa Caruso, which is the story of a lady who's just had a baby. This is her first time out. She's left the baby with her sister. She's going to a New Year's Eve party, and it gets caught in a time loop. And so, as well as it sort of falls through, as each hour strikes, it falls through a layer of reality. If it gets to the 12th hour, it'll fall out through the bottom of the void and everyone will die. And there are various other stakes at hand, but also she has to deal with the fact that her milk is coming in and it's her first time being alone without the baby, in the way that you feel sort of so relieved to be alone in yourself, and also like desperately anxious and like your arms are
yeah,
empty, and is that kind of state of being while also trying to save the world and reckoning with her old identity as a hound, which is sort of like a police person, and her new identity as a mother. And people keep asking her when she's coming back to work or if she's going to stay at home with the baby, and all of that judgment is happening. And each hour, everyone else's memories reset, but hers doesn't. Uh, and it is so much fun. It does have a touch of what I think of as a sort of American fan fiction sensibility, where everyone is sort of very beautiful and cool. Even if they're evil, they're kind of epic, and it just feels a little bit fan servicey, but in a fun
yeah.
way. Um, you know, and I think it's done very well. But there is a particular flavor that I sort of recognize in it, of like probably, and I don't know anything about Melissa Caruso's history, but like she's probably played role-playing games or Dungeons and Dragons with friends who really enjoy her storytelling and kind of is trying to cater to their taste to some degree. So it does have a bit of that, what they call the rule of cool thing. So that might be to your taste or not to your taste. I think those two are very different ends of the spectrum. One is very comforting in the aesthetics, and one is quite disconcerting and eerie in the aesthetics.
What you strike on there about how it feels fan fictiony in that everyone's hot. It would be lovely to get some fan fiction that takes stories like this, where everyone is super hot and makes them super frumpy, super dowdy, super square. It's still essentially the same story, but like all of a sudden, like they're wearing cardigans and sensible shoes. That is like, let's bring the fantasy back to a level of fantasy that's appropriate for every man on the street.
Well, I think you want, yeah, cozy fantasy there. Although I think they're
Yeah,
meant to
yeah,
be hot in cozy fantasy too. I think the
yeah.
point about
I guess
fantasy
they're
is
just
that
hot in
everyone's
cardigans. Yeah,
hot. Yeah. Even orcs are
yeah.
hot in fantasy, depending on the
Well, yeah,
fantasy.
yeah. Alice, there was one other thing that I watched in a week in the last 7 days, which is a TV series with Sterling K. Brown called Paradise. I watched it on Star via Disney, and I just thought it's worth a mention. You watch episode 1, you're like, why would I be talking about it now? This is not a sci-fi show. This is not a fantasy show. And I'm sorry, the show's been out a while now. Spoiler alert. It's massively sci-fi because they're living in a mountain because it's the end of the world. And they have built this society in a mountain. And it's great. It's a crime drama. It's a crime drama first and foremost, but with that lovely undercurrent of sci-fi, which just ticks away in the background. Are there other survivors? What technology do we need to keep the system inside the mountain working? What is the state of the world outside, and how do we cope with that? The acting is a touch wooden, but as proper high concept, light touch sci-fi. Look, it takes a lot. I mean, I don't have a lot of time in my life, so it takes a lot for me to do a whole season in a week. So shout out to Paradise as well.
And that brings me to Trope on a Rope, which is our section where we discuss tropes that we either love or every time we come across them, they make us cringe. My trope on a rope for this week is kids getting aged up and then dropped back in the plot later. Or a sort of a subtrope of this trope is secret children that you suddenly find out about midway through or very far into a series, you suddenly find out that someone's always had a secret child, maybe secret to them from a one-night stand they had years ago. A bandit for this is The Fast and the Furious 9, where they just suddenly have a Vin Diesel having had a baby. And you can tell by the age of the baby that a lot has happened in the 9 movies because he's not that old.
Can I ask, Alice, how old is the baby when introduced into this? Is it like, oh, I haven't mentioned I've got a kid, oh, and now they're 14? Or are they written in as a small child?
This is the thing. So, for example, in Outlander, she goes back and then she arrives with a teenage daughter that just sort of appears and she has to deal with it, or a daughter in her early 20s. So I'm going to get to this in our subgenre deep dive, but I sort of think it's cheating that you suddenly have a fully formed child and that they're meant to have like a parent-child relationship with you, despite the fact that you have spent most of their life absent. I find that quite frustrating and annoying about what you think having children is, maybe.
Yeah, especially if you as the audience have gone through a character journey with that person, you feel like you have some ownership in that relationship. And for them to all of a sudden drop on you 10 years in, 9 movies in, that they've got a really significant family member who they have love and beef with and you knew nothing about it, it kind of feels like your relationship with them is lessened, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, either they've been keeping it secret from you or it's been being kept a secret from them, which is either the person they partnered with
Yeah.
is keeping this thing a secret from them, which is an awful thing to do to somebody, or unless they're really terrified of you, in which case, why are they all of these, it just raises all of these questions. I don't like it at all. What is your trope on a rope?
Now, Alice, I'm talking to you about this now. I could talk to anyone about this anytime they want to listen, ever. And this is thick, cockney-sounding, low-level bad guys. I appreciate it is pretty much my accent. If someone has my accent in a TV show or film, they are dodgy and they are low-level and they are stupid. So the easiest, most obvious example for someone who's not familiar with British accents would be the orcs in Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, etc. They all speak like this and they're all bloody stupid. And that extends to The Witch is a Polish story, right? Yeah? No. In the English translation, for some reason, they're all cockneys. Harry Potter, cockneys. Peter Pan, cockneys. Anything Aardman, cockneys. Paddington fucking Bear, cockneys.
The baddies, cockneys.
And they always have a boss, and their boss has a aristocratic British accent, and that's been discussed quite a lot. I think there's a lot made of the aristocratic Brit who is the bad guy. Again, to take the Lord of the Rings example here, it is Saruman is like, posh British baddie, and working for him is a bunch of thick Cockney orcs. And it's like, we can have brains, we can organize, we could be the leader bad guys, or maybe one day the good guys. Unless, of course, you're Jason Statham.
Is this not just an encompassing in trope of the progress of the British Empire? British aristocrats performing evil schemes while thick cockneys carry out their dirty work.
That's very true. It's like, yes. The amount of thick cockneys raging across the old British Empire probably does put some weight on that. But I've got to raise children, and they're asking, why do all the bad idiots sound like me?
Yeah, it's true.
I've got to explain to them, well, what you have to understand is that in Middle-earth, if you come from Mordor, then that's basically Hackney. And it's not fair. It's not right. So my request, mix the accents up. Of course, don't be all racist about it. Don't give them like Indian or Nigerian or Texan accent. Actually, you can give them Texan accents. That would be fantastic. But don't always make them cockneys. Make them Geordies for once. Everyone loves Geordies. Make them evil.
Have some middle-class thugs who are doing the thugging on the side to support their career in the arts. Come on.
I love that.
And that brings us to the subgenre deep dive for this week, which is books in science fiction and fantasy which have parenting on the page, particularly of infants and toddlers, but also young children. That is to say, toddlers or babies or small children inside the plot rather than being kidnapped, rather than the author whisking them off to be aged up or fridging them at the beginning of the show for trauma motivation. I'm not talking here. I mean, I put this out on Blue Sky. Please tweet us at Realms Unknown on Blue Sky. But a lot of people suggested books and television series which have children as the protagonists, with the parents off, Disney murdered in the first 5 minutes, or absentee and neglectful as they were in all of the sort of early Narnia-style fiction. But that's not what I want. I want works that have the realistic job of parenting, particularly infants or small children, inside the adventure. Now, that is rare as hen's teeth. And I get why. Obviously, having small children is kind of antithetical to having an adventure. You don't have much of a risk appetite when you have small children. But it is fascinating to me how few examples there are of this kind of story. So I really wanted to unpack some places where I think it's being done well, and some places where it's being done badly, and some places where it's being done hilariously, as in Fast and the Furious 9. Where it's not exactly parenting on page, but Jason Statham does rescue baby Brian, Vin Diesel's secret baby, on a plane, and then he has to punch some people to death, and so he puts noise-canceling headphones on the baby, and I nearly cried. I was like, this is very
that is
sweet.
lovely.
He wants to protect the sensibilities of the baby, and I thought that, that's what I want to see. I want to see how you punch some men to death while also providing a safe and nurturing environment for an infant. Do you have any suggestions for this subgenre? Because otherwise I'm going to rattle off a bunch of recommendations.
Sure. Alice, I've got a bunch. I'm happy to play tennis with you on this one.
All right. I give you one, you give me one. I give you Fast and the Furious 9. What do you got for me?
Let's go to Raised by Wolves. I don't know if you've seen this. This is a Ridley Scott-produced TV series. I'm actually not sure if it's going to return for a third season or not. Essentially, humankind out on a distant planet. This is a Kepler something or other planet. I love the use of Kepler in planets. Quite common in both real life and in sci-fi.
I always thought that was a kind of potato.
Yeah, well, maybe
Kepler potatoes that only potato fans will get.
I'm sure there are plenty who listen to this show. So this is so on the nose with the whole parenting vibe that the androids who are raising the children on this lonely planet are literally called mother and father. Their primary role is to raise the children properly. So a large part of the narrative is their struggles on a remote planet. So I guess, low/no budget to improvise, to feed their children. They struggle to find appropriate food with sufficient nutrition. They struggle with the everyday of trying to keep them educated, entertained, to grow them as proper humans. Whilst there is the whole interplanetary, humans being awful human grown-ups, and the mother and father trying to protect them from that and prepare them for it. And there's Mother, without giving any spoilers away, Mother is actually a repurposed warrior android. And, it sort of takes Tiger Mum to the nth degree. It's like, you want to see how much I'll protect my kids? Watch my laser eyes. And so Raised by Wolves, I think, fits exactly into that genre. Hit me with one of yours.
I want to recommend a manga, Lone Wolf and Cub, which is a manga in which a samurai, it begins with a classic revenge quest. He comes home to find his entire family has been murdered, except his infant son. And he offers the baby the classic choice of here's a doll, here's a sword. If you take the doll, I will kill you and then go on my revenge quest. If you take the sword, I will bring you with me and raise you in this revenge quest. And of course, the baby takes the sword. And so all of the classic samurai revenge adventure tropes happen, with him also dealing with an infant who then becomes a toddler. And as they go through the plot, he's got a baby either strapped to him or in a little cart, and they're having to deal with that. It is so much fun. I highly recommend it.
I love that. I mean, I've seen over the years a number of scenes where, warrior mum with baby strapped to them, fighting the good fight. It must be brilliant to stage. It must be a lot of fun to be the character who is acting out the role with their, I'm going to assume, doll attached to them whilst they deliver all kinds of kung fu in that scene.
Well, I mean, this is not an anime. This is like a graphic novel, but they also do have a live action movie of it. So that's pretty cool.
Have you seen Sweet Tooth, Alice?
I have read the comic book and I've seen like a couple of episodes of it. I was watching it with a friend and then we moved to different cities and I can't watch things on my own. So
Yeah, okay. I think like the way Sweet Tooth evolves, it doesn't always fit into this subgenre, but definitely the first few episodes where it again it's sort of post-apocalyptic scenario, and large parts of the narrative are this lonely father, single parents trying to raise their son in a dangerous world, try to protect them. There's, he is making toys for him. He is writing books for them. They are doing art projects, and he's teaching him how to use a slingshot, other basic skills like that. And that is, it is doing a bit of a heavy lifting for what is to come. But essentially, for a large amount of this, we are watching a kid learn to speak and spell, and it's super cozy and it's super sweet. Like the Sweet Tooth in itself, they are all hunted because they have taken on animalian features due to some kind of genetic or other crisis that has happened in that world. So it looks beautiful and it is super caring. And you just occasionally see like real stark brutality and that need for that father to protect their son from all that goes on. And well, I don't want to give too much away. And ultimately, what I guess will be his failure to truly protect the son from the outside world.
amazing. Yes, I will recommend the comic book series and you can recommend the show and they will go hand in hand
Yeah.
into the animalian future. I'm going to recommend Juliet Marilia's Heir to Seven Waters, which is, I think, the second in the Seven Waters series. It has a changeling baby.
Ah, love a changeling. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, go on.
the changeling baby has to be taken into the other world and
Yeah.
exchanged for the human baby. But then also, like, the changeling baby has been taken away from their mother in the other world, and so there's all this stuff where there's these tropes of how you ought to treat a changeling baby, but the nurturing that the lead character gives to the changeling baby and then to the human baby is all part of the, having to stop and change nappies and find food and water and all of this stuff. That process is super cool and fun and part of like integral to the process of the plot and the forward momentum of the plot. I I think it's really good. And then I would also like to recommend Saga, which is a graphic novel series where a couple from warring races and their infant adventure across worlds together. They're fleeing the authorities from both sides, and the whole series is narrated from the adult voice of the child who they are fleeing with.
Okay, yeah. Nice. Can I give an honorable mention to something that is adjacent to this? It's not the parents taking on the role of sort of raising each other. It's the kids in a place where the parents have essentially, for good or bad reasons, abandoned them. And that is Beasts of the Southern Wild, which is a movie. It has just one of the most stunning soundtracks. It's definitely fantasy adjacent. There's quite magical creatures in it. These kids, I think, you see the world through the kids' lens. And essentially, these are poor kids with a poor, sick, addicted parents. And they raise each other through, you can tell generally, but then also guide each other through pretty traumatic experiences. And that, older kid or kid who is your peer trying to nurture you and look after you is like a really, this is beautiful storytelling anyway. So yeah, it doesn't, it's not, this is the kids taking on the parenting role, and they are young kids. They are definitely sort of preschool age, and it's I could watch that film like that. It's a film that should be on your annual rotation. It's very sad
Oh,
but very beautiful.
that's a high recommendation.
Genuinely.
In gaming, I have not played this game, but apparently in God of War, Kratos has a baby. But I don't know how much actual parenting goes on in that game. I wanna recommend some real classics. Ursula Le Guin's Te Anu, in which the protagonist has to parent a baby who's been abandoned by like really brutally abusive birth parents. N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy, which has a lot of parenting and motherhood themes running through it, and again, not abstract but like concrete. Likewise, Lois McMaster Bujold, all like fascinating. A lot of the science fiction of the science of the science fiction has to do with reproductive technologies and uterine replicators and birth inside the body or outside the body and what that does to the politics of the world, as well as showing
Right.
on screen parenting at like a bunch of different ages. I just think that's a real banger. Apparently, one of the X-Men series, Jubilee, has a baby that she looks after, that she adopts and looks after. But as I said, it is rarer than I would like to see, even though I understand all of the reasons why it tends to be put aside, because babies are so time-consuming and children are so absorbing of your attention. But yeah, more of that, please. More nappy
Yeah.
changing on the eve of battle.
I think when they get it right, I think it can give like a really deep story like that. There is a real the anxiety of preparing your children for the real world in fantasy or sci-fi, where you just turn that dial up and you're not just sort of protecting them from your real life local neighborhood, but you're actually, they are helping you save the world, or at least trying to not get in the way of you save the world or prevent some really bad stuff happening. It takes that real life experience that any parent will know and just amplifies it. So if done right, it's a brilliant way to tell a story, but I think it's possibly but it's also really brutal. Like some of the most tragic story writing I've read in that space is, like no one likes to see it when this kind of thing goes bad.
Yeah, and like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, for
Yes,
example, is just
great
so
example. Yeah, yeah.
bleak. And it does show some really good on-page parenting, but that is not a feel-good book. But as a
No.
counterpoint, Thud by Terry Pratchett, Sam Vimes's meditations on fatherhood are brilliant, and as always with Terry Pratchett, like high poetic philosophy in the form of like jolly little fantasy tale. So I've got to recommend that. Now, if you have recommendations for this underutilized subgenre, I know I've said they're thin on the ground in the context of the grander scheme of things, but like babies and toddlers being parented on page or on screen, please let us know at realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com. I always want more recommendations. And yes, from all the recommendations that we got for older children being parented on page, we will do that at some point. Children off on their own adventure, parents off on their own adventure. Those will all come if you have subgenre deep dive suggestions. Again, realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com. And that brings me to the Minds of where we discuss something that we used to love, but now in retrospect seems like it's a bit And for my minds this week, I'm going to delve into the comic book series The Phantom, which I read in the late 80s. I read my uncle's set that he'd left at my grandmother's house from, I assume, the late 70s or maybe even the early 70s. And they were in my grandmother's shelves, and I went through them because that's where they were when I would stay with my grandmother. They were a picture book, and I could read them. And if you don't know the story of the Phantom, he's a mysterious man on an island who is served by the native people on the island who worship him as a god. And he punches for justice. And it's all they did a movie remake with Billy Zane that was marginally less problematic. But yeah, when you even just saying, without even describing any of the plots, the premise is what I would call I don't know, because I haven't read them since I was about 7, if I could still recommend them now, even with that caveat. But I think probably not. I think there's probably better stories out there. So that's the Phantom comic book series. Pull it off the shelf because it's got purple when you finished all the Asterix and Obelixes, and you end up opening a big old can of that will haunt you through the years.
I mean, white savior complex, Alice. I think it's very fertile territory here, isn't it? I'm assuming the Phantom was basically a white man. Am I right?
Oh, yes, yeah. Oh, yeah, should I have mentioned I mean, he's a purple man throughout most of it. When he takes his mask off, he's a white man. But
Right. Yes.
he's wearing a purple outfit. And I'm pretty sure again, this is me dredging it up. I did not go back to check on this. I just remembered the premise and was like, yeah, that fits the premise of the Minds of segment. But I'm pretty sure there is at least one point where he slaps a lady that he likes to make her shut up, and then they smooch. I am almost certain that is
Oh,
there at least once, if not more than once.
another classic trope that this show has covered. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's troublesome because you get those buttons installed early, and you think, "Well, that's a fine thing to do. It's not, someone actually has to, as an adult, tell you that that's not how people behave. Whoosh, whoosh. And then like feminism in those things is where she slaps him back, he slaps her, and then she slaps him, and then they smooch, and that's equality.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of today's show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the Bugle channel and check out our show notes where we have a link to our affiliate store, which has all of the books and all of the links to all of the shows and games that we discussed if you want to follow up on anything. Now, some recommendations. If you want to take action in your future to seize the day, if you live anywhere near the stage production of Studio Ghibli's My Neighbour Totoro, which is to say in London, then get down there right away if you're into having a joyous time and perving on Alice's puppet friend. Alternatively, watch any or all of Studio Ghibli's magnificent catalogue of films. From our subgenre deep dive of actual parenting in fantasy and sci-fi, look up the HBO series Raised by Wolves, which was produced by Ridley Scott about two androids raising human children on a distant planet after Earth is destroyed by a great war. If you want a book recommendation, particularly one with a changeling baby, you could do worse than look for The Heir to Seven Waters by Juliet Marillier. Chris, have you got anything to plug?
Alice, I have a new show. It's a podcast and it's on YouTube. It's called Mildly Informed. It is where me and my long-term collaborator, Richie Firth, are prepared to review literally anything. Something that happened to us in the week, a food product, an experience, a concept. And we released the first episode last week. It is doing very, very well. And we seem to have struck two types of audience, particularly on our TikTok, which are people who go, ha ha ha, you guys are stupid, I love it. And ha ha ha, you guys are stupid and I want to kill you. And I'm a big fan of being in that place at the moment. I mean, look, maybe we'll convert some of the haters. So yeah, it's a very fun show. It's called Mildly Informed, and I would welcome anyone who wants to watch or listen to it.
Well, you're already listening to a podcast right now, so why not line it up as in your next queue, next to listen to? I don't know what your app does. Anyway, you can get my book, A Passion for Passion, anywhere in the world right now. You can order it online. It will be in bookstores in America next week. The 5th of May is when it will be in bookshops. So please go to your bookshop and ask them if they have it. And if they don't have it, seize them by the collar and ask them why they don't have it and ask them to order it in. And then it will be out now. Yes, it will be out in Australia. I've been saying late May, but there's good news and bad news. And the good news is that they want to do it in a trade paperback, which means they expect it to sell more copies. And the bad news, that means it will be coming out in late June in Australia. That said, you can buy it online already, but it will be in bookshops in Australia in late June if you like to wander into a bookshop and touch the books up before you buy them. You can get a hard copy online now. All said, I have a Patreon. It's called patreon.com/Alice Fraser. Everything there is basically free to read, but we also have, if you are a paid subscriber, writers' meetings for a week, a comedy writers' meetings, 2 general writers' meetings, 1 admin and industry writers' meetings, and we're running writers' retreats in Switzerland in September. The applications are still open, but not for long. So if you want to write with me in Switzerland for a week, patreon.com/Alice Fraser. This is a Bugle podcast and Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Ped Hunter. Your executive producer and guest for today is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.